Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 15, Text 8, translation. All the living entities within the universe are conducted by the Vedic directions, as a bull is directed by the rope attached to its nose. No one can violate the rules laid down in the Vedic literatures. To the chief person who has contributed the Vedas, we offer our respect. Purport. The Vedic literatures are the laws of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One cannot violate the injunctions given in the Vedic literatures any more than one can violate the state laws. Any living creature who wants real benefit in life must act according to the direction of the Vedic literature. The conditioned souls who have come to this material world for material sense gratification are regulated by the injunctions of the Vedic literature. Sense gratification is just like salt. One cannot take too much or too little, but one must take some salt in order to make one's food palatable. Those conditioned souls who have come to this material world should utilize their senses according to the direction of the Vedic literature. Otherwise, they will be put into a more miserable condition of life. No human being or demigod can enact laws like those of the Vedic literature, because the Vedic regulations are prescribed by the Supreme Lord. Isya vacha praja sarva gavastantyeva yantrita hananti balim ayatas tasmai mukyaya te namaha. All the living entities within the universe are conducted by the Vedic directions, as a bull is directed by the rope attached to its nose. No one can violate the rules laid down in the Vedic literatures. To the chief person who has contributed the Vedas, we offer our respect. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also explains, Yakshashtavidim utrikya vatate kamakarta, that those personalities who avoid acting according to the Vedic literatures and who act whimsically, they do not attain happiness, nasukam, nor peace, nashantim, or the supreme destination, naparam gatim. They cannot attain actually anything good, any good result. Now sometimes people think that this is some kind of fanaticism, such a statement. That after all, you can attain happiness or peace. You don't need the Vedic literatures to do that. But factually we can see in the material world there are so many various forms of attempts to become happy and peaceful. But these attempts are actually not very successful. And people, we have seen it again and again, are not very successful at attaining happiness or peace because there's always so many agitating elements of this material creation. Now, when one follows the Vedic literature, these agitating elements are to a great degree conquered. Why? Because the Vedas regulate one's life in such a way that they allow the living entity to have a little bit of salt, as Prabhupada describes it in this purport. Actually, that's a wonderful example. Salt. Because some salt is good, too much salt is terrible. No salt is also not very good. Like if you have a sabji and there's no salt, then it's pretty bland. Too much salt, then burns like anything and it's terrible. And if you put just the right amount of salt, then it's very nice. So sense gratification is like that. It has to be the right amount. If it's too much, that's not very nice. If it's too little, that's not very nice. If it's just right, that's very nice. Therefore, those who are expert at the art of sense gratification. They take just the right amount of sense gratification with life, and in this way they go on enjoying. Now that's what the Vedic literature does. It regulates the salt in the sabji. It regulates the amount of sense gratification that one may have in life in such a way that one can become peaceful, happy, and ultimately attain the supreme destination. But one must follow those Vedic instructions. Here it is stated, no one can violate the rules laid down in the Vedic literatures. Now, of course, you can violate the rules laid down in the Vedic literatures. People do it all the time. But what it means is that you won't be able to get any success if you violate the rules of the Vedic literatures. You can violate them, certainly, but you'll not get happiness or peace nor the supreme destination. So, the living entities are in any case conducted by the Vedic rules. Because there are two ways you can think of rules. One way is the sense that rule is this is what you should do. And then you think, well, if I break it, then I'm violating the rules of what I should do. But the other way of looking at it is that, well, here are the rules of what I should do. And if I do something else, then there are also rules how I should suffer. So, because of that, no one can actually violate the rules of the Vedic literatures. Because in this sense, violate will mean no one can actually act outside of those rules. So let's say you are slaughtering animals. So the rule is don't do it. But you do it anyway. So the further rule is now you're going to have to suffer various births for that. That rule you cannot violate. You can violate the first rule. Don't slaughter animals. But you can't violate the second. Once you have done such a thing, now you must suffer. That rule you cannot violate. So therefore one can say, no one can violate the rules of the Vedic literatures. Because no one is outside of the direction of the law of karma. No one is outside of the injunctions or the instructions or the force of controlling potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Lord, He is controlling everything within this creation. And nobody can step outside of that control. Now it's interesting to use the example of a bull controlled by the nose. Interesting for two reasons. Number one, the bull is big and strong. And factually, if a bull is running after you, you're in trouble. Big trouble. Yeah. Even you run up a tree, he may just start beating the tree and shaking it so much you fall out. So heavy are these bulls. So much passion is there. So much passion to enjoy the material world. So much lust. And thus so much power because of these lusty desires. So the bulls, they're very powerful fellows. But if you just put a ring in their nose, and you just tug it a little bit, then they become very submissive. Then they'll go this direction, that direction. Because they're very much afraid of the tug on the nose, because the nose is very sensitive in the bull. Of course, you cannot pull too hard. Then it will rip out, and then they'll just rip you to pieces. But just a little tug is sufficient to direct the big bull. So similarly, little tugs of sense desires in different directions will cause the big living entity who's like a bull trying to enjoy this material world. It will cause him to suffer. In other words, it will cause him to be forced to move in this direction, this direction. That forcing and causing one to act in ways which he might not ordinarily act is like a suffering process. It will cause him to suffer because it is forcing him to move in this or that direction, against his will even. be just like the bull has to turn left and right against his will. It is not that he's interested in turning left and right when you want. That's not his interest. His interest is sitting somewhere under a tree and eating grass and having sex. So you are forcing him against his will to move. And similarly, the senses, by tugging on the nose of desire, causes one to move this way, that way, the other way. So the first example is how that bull is so big and strong and so powerful, yet he's forced to act under the direction of the senses. But the senses are acting, or should be acting, under the direction of the Veda, because the Veda regulates one's sense desires by allowing him to have a system or structure within which he works, which gives him all kinds of success. He gets success because these activities do not cause destruction. These activities, under the Vedic direction, cause happiness, peace, and the supreme destination all at once. Now, the second way in which this bull example is interesting is because we find that even in the universe, the whole universal creation, it is described that the planets are yoked, connected to one pivotal point in the universe, and they're all forced to go around that point like yoked by energy. They're connected by a rope of energy, like bulls connected by the nose, or bulls connected to a pivot as they go around in a grinding wheel or something like this, as they make the wheel move. So the planets also are directed in the same fashion by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the sun himself cannot move 1 inch out of his prescribed orbit, totally regulated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, according to the plan of the Lord. Of course, his plan is much more complex than our plan. We could not organize the universe. Even just how the planets are moving is far beyond. Even all of the scientists of this planet could not get together with all of the biggest computers of this planet and organize how all of the planets are going to move relative to each other and keep the universe going without anything crashing. Not possible. Far beyond the capacity of even all the scientists. Because it's very complicated. So many moving bodies. And they all have to move relative to each other. And they all have to stay in their respective orbits. Otherwise, if the Earth would move a few feet out of orbit this direction, that direction, it would cause havoc with the weather. Or if it would tilt a little bit this way or that way, or whatever it is that it does, the whole place would be upside down. Literally. So therefore, we should understand how the Supreme Lord has strictly, tightly, in great precision, arranged this whole wonderful cosmic manifestation. And keeps it going, maintaining it for long periods of time. You can count on things going on. Yeah. So we see how everything is tightly yoked. Actually, yoga, yoke, these words are very similar, meaning connection. It's like when we speak of yoga, we're talking about connection. And yoking, yoke the oxen to the cart. The planets are yoked to the pole star. Or so many things are connected in this way, all in this material world, because Krishna has it all tightly under control. Everything's under control. Now, whether or not one can accept or understand that it's under one person's control, that is another thing. The scientists may say it's under the control of chance. We say it's under the control of the Supreme. But it's under the control in either case. If something is controlling it out there. So, that controlling tendency, that controlling, activity, is also described in the Vedic literatures as to exactly how the living entities should act, because they are also to be controlled. So there is a way in which they should act, and that way, that regulative way, is described in the Vedas, but in that way, it's a little bit different than in the way, for instance, of the planets being controlled. The planets have no choice. It is not that the planets can say, yes, now I will accept to be under the control of Krishna and I will move in this direction. And then next day they will say, okay, now we're going to fly off into some spiral orbit somewhere else. They are strictly in control. They cannot move. But you, the living entity, have a choice. You can stay strictly under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or you can reject that, do what you like. But under control you will remain, now under control of Maya. You can take your choice. And don't think, oh, we've heard this before. Yeah, you may have heard it before. And you're going to hear it again. Because this is the basic point upon which all activities rest in this material world. That we've got a choice. One can be Krishna conscious by surrendering to Krishna and going under his control. Or one can be Maya conscious and surrendering under the control of Maya. But under control one must be. There's no real state as being completely out of control. Sometimes we say, oh, this class or that class is out of control. Out of control means out of Krishna's control. Now it is under the control of Maya, under the senses. Then one can be completely out of control, because one is totally surrendered to the control of Maya. So, to be under Krishna's control, that is intelligence. To think you're out under nobody's control means you're a fool. To think you're in control, that is even bigger fool. To understand that you're under control in one way or another, when you're in Maya or Krishna conscious, that means intelligence. But to think oneself independent of being controlled means one is a fool. Therefore, one should act in such a way as to stay under Krishna's control, or to get under Krishna's control. You're already anyway controlled by Krishna. But to recognize that and appreciate that and like that and want that and work with that knowledge, that is the perfection. To understand, I'm controlled, I'm not the controller. Therefore, if I have any brain whatsoever, I'll want to surrender to the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not under the control of Maya, who's a cruel, hard master. Maya is certainly cruel and hard, there's no doubt about it. Maya Sukhaya, giving some drops of happiness which do not last and do not actually satisfy. And everybody's looking for this, like mad people. Looking for Maya Sukhaya. And when it comes, then they think, this is right. When it's not there, they think, I've got to get it. But ultimately, it doesn't bring them anything. Therefore, we are trying to surrender to Krishna. So sometimes the attempt is more successful than others. That should not discourage us. Because simply by staying under Krishna's control, one can actually develop his pure Krishna consciousness, develop his spiritual form, develop his spiritual personality, come beyond the platform of materialistic identity, and develop spiritual identity, and actually go back home, back to Godhead, which is the whole purpose of this whole Krishna consciousness movement, is to bring you, the living entity, back home, back to Godhead. Although sometimes we forget about that. We think sometimes the purpose is to do some work, or the purpose is to make some money, or the purpose is to become famous, or get a big position. But the purpose is to go back home, back to Godhead, to become Krishna conscious. And then, in the process of becoming Krishna conscious, what better way to act than to bring others also back to Krishna? While we are becoming Krishna conscious, we require some method, process, so therefore we also should act in such a way that others will also go back to Krishna. So as we are going back to Krishna, we bring all of these conditioned souls along with us. This is the process of Krishna consciousness. To bring the fallen, conditioned souls back home, back to Godhead, along with us. We should go back home, back to Godhead too. So this is the whole purpose of this Krishna consciousness movement. To develop our love for Krishna, to help others develop their love for Krishna. Like a big train, just picking up passengers from the stations of the material world and going straight back to Godhead. Maybe even it's a little slow. For some, it's slower than others. It's a big, long train. Some are simply sitting in the back car, taking their time. They say, anyway, this train's going back. All right, well, wake me up when it gets there. Others, they are running in the cars, from car to car, because they are very much disturbed why this train is taking so long. And besides that, if I'm up front of the train, I'll get there first. Yeah. So they're very eager to run up to the front of the train. It's a real long train. Yeah. So they are just running up to the front of the train. So you have all different kinds of persons. Some are very complacent. Some are very dynamic. Some are a mixture of the two. Some are in different states. But so long as we have this very strict idea that we want to develop our love for Krishna and serve Him, go back to Godhead and bring others back to Godhead, then we are somehow going to be safe from the bondage of the material nature. Somehow. But as soon as we develop the idea that we, the living entities, are the enjoyers or independent controllers or something like this, then there's going to be all kinds of trouble in this material world for us and for others too. We'll make trouble for ourselves and we'll make trouble for others. This is the unfortunate fact. So we should try to do things in such a way as to develop our love for God. Are there any questions? Today we give you a chance to ask some questions. Yes? Fear means when you have such a, it's an analogy. Fear means when you have such a powerful personality that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, then you may get some trouble. So, therefore, even if there was some idea not to move in that direction, because of the very powerful personality involved, everything's moving in that way, out of fear. But that's not the only reason. But that is a big factor. It's like in case you ever thought you wanted to do something terrible to somebody, but you wouldn't do it because out of fear of the reprisal that you would get from the government or something like this. So the government is not giving you any reason to be afraid at this moment. But you know, well, if I were to act in that way, then I would become very, very much in trouble. So therefore, that keeps you regulated. It's like the laws of the state keep you regulated because you know if I break them, then I'll get in trouble. But an ordinary good person in the society wouldn't break them anyway. But it helps one stay good. Or from the beginning one's taught that, well, if you don't act in the right way, you're going to get in trouble. And that's also fear, which keeps you good. In other words, it's the way in which powerful authorities maintain their authority. There's a fear factor there. Actually, in the Varnashram system, the Kshatriya has to have that respect of the people. There has to be some fearfulness there. Therefore, they have big, big palaces and big armies. And they're big, huge men themselves. Because they have to inspire fear in those that they have to manage so that they will go on acting in the right way without having to be beaten into submission. Let's say, for instance, you're a weak, useless kind of authority. So everybody will do everything. They'll walk right over your face. And if you want them to do anything, you have to bring out so many forces to beat them in the head. But that's a failure. As soon as you have to start beating people, you're a failure. So if one can get them to do everything right without having to show any force, like you show the stick, but you never use it. That's one way of dealing with children sometimes. Show it. But you don't use it. So, in that way, it regulates things. So Krishna is such an awesome personality. Everybody acts in the right way. Yes? Well, I missed the whole first part of what you said. But anyway, envy means that when you... It's very difficult to understand envy because in the material world we are trained to think that envy means somebody else has something and we want it. Let's say the next door neighbor has a better car than us, so we get envious of him because we want that car. So we're trained to think that's envy. But that's only one small portion of envy. Because in the material world we're so envious, we don't even understand the envy. What is actually envy, we think is just normal things. So we've limited the definition of enviousness to some very, very narrow portion of the whole totality of what is enviousness. Enviousness also means if you think that somebody else is better than you, then you become envious of him. Why is he better than me? I shall drag him down. Or enviousness, if you stretch it even more, which is not really stretching, but I mean if you stretch the material definition even more, you find enviousness means, oh, why is that person speaking badly of me? Why doesn't he respect me? And then we feel badly about that person. So that's enviousness. Why he doesn't respect me? How can he think like that? We become envious of the other person. So it's not that this definition is wrong or strange. It's that the material definition is completely limited and improper. Therefore, we have to learn this proper definition of how enviousness pervades practically everything in this material activity. Everybody's acting out of it. This whole social pressure is actually based on envy principle. That, oh, if you don't do the right thing, then this other person is going to think of you in this way, and you don't like that. That's why avadutas, who are freed from envy, couldn't care less about social principles, because you can't control them, because they're not envious. Even a top-class brahmana is not controlled by external social principles. He's only controlled by the Shastra. Because by social pressure, you cannot force him to do anything. Oh, all the other brahmanas are going to this mela. You should go too. No, that won't work. So although that's a little difficult to understand these things, just wait, and in some period of time, by gradual analysis, they'll become more clear. It means expanding the definition. It means anything where we don't understand that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer and controller, and we're not the supreme enjoyer and controller. And that when the situation arises where it's shown to us that we're not the supreme enjoyer and controller, and we become angry at that or disturbed with that, that's envy. Pocket definition. No, because you can always change that by your desire. It's not that you can be forced to be happy as a potter. But you may be an expert one. But you may not even learn how to be an expert one. Just like, for instance, your father may be expert at clay work. And then when you do it, you do it, but they all fall apart. Holes in the pot, put the water in. So it's realized that you're pretty useless. So maybe this is not your thing. But the attempt is there. Just like Prabhupada says in Bhagavad Gita, the son of a high court justice is not a high court justice. But the tendency to become expert at it is there. But he must be trained. So, tendency may be there. And when there's actual garbhadan samskara, when the children are actually produced in a proper fashion, then automatically the child will have the same qualities as the parents. Therefore, there will also be compatibility there. Why not? It's just a procedure. Yes, well, that's another thing. Yes? Manusamhita is just like it's ancient. Manusamhita gives some principles. Like, don't steal. That we take. And don't have sex with your guru's wife. These are principles. So we take the principles. But the punishments, really now, we wouldn't. Some of them are just so horrifying, you couldn't even think of them. But that's good. If you knew that if you did this, this is what you'd have to do, you'd never do that. But the law has metamorphized, or rather been modified. Not modified, that's not the right word. What am I looking for in this word? Has Anyway, the law has transformed according to the times and places and circumstances throughout the ages. Formerly, people were of such a quality. Today, people are of such a quality. So the law has become like acclimated. No, it has changed according to the peoples. As the peoples have changed, the laws have changed. As the time have changed, the laws have changed. So there are very basic principles of law which are always the same, but the specific ways in which that law is manifested changes. Like formerly, if you did something terrible, well, that would be really terrible. Nowadays, if you do something terrible, it's, that's the way it is. Because of the consideration of what is bad and what is good, that has changed so much. Therefore, the punishments are not so strict as they were previously for all kinds of things. Like, as a matter of course, you break so many spiritual laws. As a matter of course. If we were to punish everybody for all these things they did wrong, there'd be nobody left. So that forgiveness thing must be there. To go more deeply into this is too difficult. It'll take too long. So I tried to give just some basic principle of how it might be done. To give this proper justice, this question would take about 3 hours. 3 hours, 3 days, 3 years. You can't just answer it so quickly. It's such a big question. Law, principles of law. Yes? Talk fast because we're nearing the end. No. Heavenly planets does not mean more elevated spiritually. It means they're more elevated materially. Some heavenly planets, like in the sun, you get a form of fire. It depends if they're very, very advanced in those places. Generally, they worship Vishnu in various forms, if they do. Otherwise, they're devotees of the particular demigod of those particular planets. But they're not. Generally, you don't go to the heavenly planets to worship Krishna. You come here to worship Krishna. But how they appreciate or how they don't appreciate the form of the Lord is beyond me. At least in this lifetime. That, I'm sure they do. But how specifically, that's too detailed. Can't answer that question. I'm sure they do. Everybody, Krishna's the most attractive for all. Look, even the deer are attracted to Krishna. So you might ask the same question. Well, how can the deer appreciate Krishna? See? There's the deer appreciating Krishna. So it's the same question, isn't it? Huh? Isn't it? Why is it different? Well, the deer goes like this. You say the lightning goes like this, so that's different. I say the deer goes like this. What's the difference? Different substance. Mundane conception. Captured in the mundane conception. All right, Hare Krishna.